Okay, this is the first episode of the Regenerative Entrepreneurs Podcast. I have Gavin Raders here from Planting Justice. How you doing today, Gavin?
Hey, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet, man. Well, you were the first one I thought of. Our journey goes quite a ways back, doesn't it?
It does.
We first met, what was it, 12 and change years ago, right? In a co-op in Berkeley.
Yep.
So I want to just get a kind of an overview of your business, Planting Justice. You know, what is Planting Justice? What is the mission? Maybe you can give our audience some background on that.
Sure. Well, Planting Justice is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Even though, and we'll speak a lot more about this, even though we run numerous social enterprises and try our best to generate as much of our own revenue as possible, all of that is done as Planting Justice, the nonprofit. And the mission of Planting Justice is really, it's an economic, environmental, and food justice organization. So we are creating living wage jobs for formerly incarcerated people and others with barriers to employment that are transforming our local food system, making it more just, equitable, and sustainable.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's go back to the beginning. When did this idea arise to get into this work for you?
It's hard to say. It was sort of a combination of most of my life experiences. So really, I mean, most of my work experience prior to Planting Justice was doing some form of community organizing, a lot of anti-war organizing, a lot of canvassing, knocking on doors, actually asking people for money. And that was for other nonprofits that were working in the peace movement. And spent a lot of time as a student organizing on campus and off campus, and in all of my spare time working in the peace movement by doing a lot of fundraising and canvassing. So the experience of walking up and down blocks of many major cities throughout the United States, Western United States, and talking to people about their lives and about what was happening in the United States and abroad, and really just kind of taking in how disconnected we all are from our neighbors, from one another, from the land that we live on, how land really isn't being used to meet people's real needs, and wanting to actually use some of those tactics around grassroots organizing and canvassing in a different way, specifically around food, land, and local transformative work.
Yeah. Okay. So you had a lot of experience going door to door, kind of raising awareness for these, causes that you were passionate about. And when did you get the idea, okay, I want to grow food. I want to help people grow food, plant gardens in their backyards. How did that come about?
It was somewhat gradual. I spent some time in South India as a student. I got a grant from the university to go and learn with some farmer organizers in Kerala, and specifically around water privatization, organizing to prevent water privatization. And really kind of saw firsthand on that trip how the United States food system is impacting literally billions of people around the world. And I understood that sort of theoretically, and really kind of super inspired by the activists I was meeting in India, really organizing on a community scale to provide housing, water, food, community, the basic necessities for life, realizing that in the United States, in a quote unquote wealthy country, we are actually very disconnected from the basic necessities that we need in order to live, and really rely on the state and the market for those. Right. And so it was kind of just a gradual sort of eye-opening around what it means to live in a country with an enormous amount of wealth inequality, that actually exports that wealth inequality through a lot of its agricultural policies. What I was seeing in India was a lot of people living in slums who for generations were farmers, and they weren't able to live any longer in their ancestral lands growing the foods that they wanted to grow because they couldn't afford it, given that the United States was shipping rice overseas at really subsidized rates for farmers in the United States and undercutting farmers. And we see that happening in Mexico with NAFTA, and a lot of corn farmers having to leave their ancestral lands and migrate looking for work. So sort of, and then in the United States, the long historical context, very tragic and violent history around land, labor, stolen land, stolen labor in the United States, resulting in a really inequitable food system. Kind of putting all of these together and realizing that, folks in the United States, we've sort of lost a lot of knowledge, a lot of ability to keep our own ancestral traditions alive because we've been disconnected from land and our own labor. And the kind of very slow violence that happens on people's bodies in the United States when they can only access highly industrialized foods because they've lost community access to land and control over their own labor. So sort of putting all of those together, and simultaneously, while Hele and I were starting the organization, we were also volunteering at San Quentin State Prison in a garden program there, and meeting a lot of people who really wanted to grow food, wanted to continue on this healing journey when they return home from prison, but were really anxious about what it was going to be like to come back to probably no job, probably no housing, and a really difficult situation out on the outside. So we really made a commitment to utilize our privileges, the many different privileges that we have, our ability to access resources, our ability to organize, so that the folks coming home from the garden program at San Quentin would be the ones who were leading the on-the-ground work in their own communities. As white presenting, light-skinned folks working in low-income public schools with Black and brown youth, it's one thing to be talking about food justice and, health and all these things, and a whole nother thing when it's people who have lived those experiences that our young people are going through, who could be, uncles, brothers, fathers to these young people who really deeply understand what it's like to go to high school in West Oakland in a food apartheid and economic apartheid sort of situation. And it's those folks that really need to be leading this work and making the changes that we're making right now as an organization.
Right. Wow. So you're taking kind of the privileges that we have as light-skinned individuals and empowering these people who have been historically suppressed.
Yeah. And folks dream while they're incarcerated or while they're not incarcerated. Folks dream about what needs to change. We all live the problems in a lot of different ways, but we live them differently. And folks who are closest to the problem should be closest to the solutions, and they know much better than anybody else what needs to change and how to do it. But there's just not space created for folks who have no work history, who have felonies on their record, who are discriminated against in many ways in this society, to be able to fully dive into it, and needing, actually, in order to fully dive into it, a living wage, a family supporting, a living wage in order to do that, because poor people can't volunteer 5 days a week or work for small stipends. And what we were seeing in the food justice movement or urban agriculture movement in the Bay Area was that a lot of good work was being done, but a lot of it was being done by college educated folks. And the folks who are most impacted by food and economic and land injustice and that whole history, were not really having the space to be able to dive into it full time. So then it was, figuring out, well, how do we do that? How do we generate the funding? How do we be able to pay people to do this work full time and to not have to figure out another way to feed themselves and their families?
Yeah. So I'm really curious about that piece. How do we do that? Can you take me back to, was there a moment when you realize, okay, this thing is going to work? Like, let's go all in. Was there a kind of a tipping moment for you? You're like, okay.
I don't know. We were lucky to start it at a time where Hele, the co-founder of Planting Justice, my partner, and I, we were both childless. We were living in community living. Actually, the two of us were on food stamps for the first year or so when we were starting the organization. We were able to take risks that we wouldn't have been able to take later on in our lives.
Right.
So we were really actually trying to start a model that we hadn't really seen being done before. And so that's always very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But wanting to do it, especially because it hadn't really been done before, because we know that if we figured it out, it would increase the chances that other people around the country would be able to do similar work. And we're really holding that as our highest, and we'll talk about this more, our highest expression of what we hope Planting Justice is able to do is to help spark and catalyze, figure out the barriers and help people to do the work that we do in cities across the United States. Because really we need a structural, systemic change in our economic system and our food system, in the way that land is used or not used, and the way that people are valued or not valued.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me in some ways of, I spent time on Mark Shepard's farm in Wisconsin, and, you know, he's trying to create this system that has never existed before, this perennial crop system where he has to, you know, he's working with chestnuts and hazelnuts, and he has to first breed the crops, right? Yeah. And then he has to develop the machinery to actually process. It's from scratch. He's basically having to build a system. And it sounds like, you know, in some ways that's what you guys are trying to do, a replicable system that we can scale out across the country.
Thankfully, we got access to some pretty good principles through the sort of permaculture world, and that we applied those principles in developing our business model and our organizational model. There's a lot about the permaculture movement that is lacking. And so we also were able to understand those, you know, living as interns on that permaculture farm up in Bolinas, really seeing how healing it is to be living close to land, and how most people have no access to that, and how that sort of permaculture package of sort of packaging indigenous knowledge from around the world and selling it at a high price to somewhat wealthy folks is good for those people, but what about the rest of us? So really wanting to try to do our best to make permaculture, even though we don't often even use that word, more accessible, relevant, affordable, because that toolbox is a really powerful one. And so we were actually able to use a lot of those principles and ethics and design a sort of parameters in designing the Planting Justice model as well.
Great. Tell me a little bit about, so back when you started Planting Justice, was there a goal that you guys were chasing? Was there like a 10-year vision? Did you have a business plan, or was it just like, okay, we're going to try this thing, this feels right now, and just kind of see where it goes? What was the business strategy like?
Yeah, it's interesting. And we kind of, Helene and I had somewhat of a aha moment. I remember the conversation we had when the sort of the 4 or 5 programs of Planting Justice really came together as a coherent sort of ecosystem, as a model. And yeah, we actually have stayed pretty true to that. We didn't understand or know how it would happen or what land we would get, and you know, in the particular ways that it ended up happening. Sure. But the design we had in mind from the very beginning, and that is sort of a combination of strategies. One is utilizing other people's land, because we didn't own any land. Right. We were pretty under-resourced, to put it kindly, at the beginning.
And you're in the Bay Area, which doesn't help, right?
Yeah, exactly, in the California Bay Area. And so we started just building gardens for people who could pay us to do that. That was the most immediate way to start generating revenue. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve, but we started designing and building edible gardens, utilizing a lot of permaculture design principles. And we understood that we wanted to canvas. We wanted to do the grassroots organizing, grassroots fundraising, meeting people in our community and talking to them about the vision, about the work that we do, and about ways that people could plug in. And so the Canvas program has been really integral, especially as we've developed new social enterprises and new products, new ways for people to really work alongside us or support this work.
Yeah, I can't imagine a more effective way to spread awareness than going door to door and sharing face to face what you guys are up to.
Yeah, we've talked to tens of thousands of
Yeah.
people in our community about our work over the years by canvassing and making those personal relationships one-on-one.
Right.
And then having an education program that works with young people at schools, and also works in prisons, jails, juvenile detention facilities. That's our education program.
Okay.
And those are sort of larger scale community gardens that we've built at many dozens of sites, and most of which we return to once a week or once or twice a month, depending on the site. And we lead educational programming that covers sort of health and wellness, urban permaculture, growing food, culinary arts, nutrition, and then all within kind of a larger socio-political context. Is what does this garden really mean? How does it fit into to this larger national movement and global movement for food sovereignty and food justice? And so that's the education team. And then we knew we wanted access to land, but we didn't know how that was going to happen. So it took us a while, but we were able to. So far, we're now working on quite a bit of land in the Bay Area through some really innovative strategies. One is now a 13-acre property that Planting Justice leases 5 of those acres in El Sobrante, and we have a perennial food forest that serves as the mother farm for a globally significant plant collection, a nursery that we acquired from Mark and Karina up in Humboldt County, Rolling River Nursery, which we loved. We were a customer of theirs for a long time, and we were actually able to acquire their business when they needed to retire and move on. And we moved that whole nursery to East Oakland on a 2-acre empty lot in the Sobrante Park neighborhood on 105th Avenue. So there's the 5-acre farm in El Sobrante, and now the 2-acre nursery in East Oakland, and more land opportunities coming, which are really
beautiful. Give us a sense. So you started in, was it late 2008 with Planting Justice?
2008.
How long did it take before you got your hands on some land?
Oh, a long time. We closed escrow on when my daughter was born. The day she was going to be born, we actually needed to then push that over a week and had the baby. So that was in 2012. In August 2012, we closed escrow in El Sobrante. Planting Justice wasn't able to purchase that land. We were a small organization then. It was outside our main service area, outside of Oakland. And so Haley and I and other friends, Andrew, who started at Planting Justice very early on, Leah, who was a board member, and a couple other friends, we formed an LLC that was ready to go into debt. And we were able to purchase the 10-acre property, which is now 13 acres, but at the time it was 10. We bought that for $300,000. And we were able to do that by raising funds from sort of slow money investors, people in our community who wanted to take money out of the stock market or of other investments and put it into land and food projects. And so we got, I think, about 15 or 18 low interest lenders. It took us about a year. We were much more virgin fundraisers back then. It took us about a year to raise the $300,000. And luckily a progressive bank owned the property, New Resource Bank in San Francisco, and they let us extend escrow 6 or 7 times. So it was very lucky that we were able to raise that money. But that enabled Planting Justice to get access to its first piece of land to start its first farm and training center. And then with the rest of the land, the LLC that we started, Wild and Radish, is building a residential eco-village that's trying to do long-term affordable housing that enables people to live close to the land and close to the food that they eat in community.
Beautiful. So that was about 4 years. You talk about it like it was a really long time. For some people, that might not be a super long time, but I'm sure it felt like a long time, right?
It did. Yeah. And then the land in East Oakland, we purchased with a loan from a community development financial institution. That's sort of essentially like, it's like a bank, but not a bank. They lend to nonprofits. And that entity is called the Northern California Community Loan Fund. And they gave us an acquisition loan to purchase a 2-acre empty lot in East Oakland, which we bought in 2016. Great.
So I want to jump to, this podcast is about permaculture and entrepreneurship. And, I want to get a little bit more, if you're willing, into, how the revenue breaks down for Planting Justice. Like, where is the money coming from? What activities, how much of it is, donor gifts, and how much is, for-profit activities?
Yeah. So when we're a much smaller organization, the first 4, 5, 6, even 7 years, we generated about 60 or 70% of our operating income. It enabled us to grow pretty quickly and to be a flexible and nimble organization. So we started
those for-profit activities, the 60 to 70%. Okay.
Yep. And then, so that was mostly through our Transform Your Yard design and build, permaculture landscaping service, and through canvassing. And then in the past couple of years, as we've purchased land and needed to build out capital infrastructure on that land, we needed more money. And so the percentage of revenue that came from our own programs fell to about 45 or 50% these last couple of years. But it's still growing, because the organization is larger. So last year our budget was about $2.2 million, and about $1 million of that came from our own programs. And that was through the landscaping team, canvassing, and the nursery, rollingrivernursery.com, which is a mail order nursery serving customers in 48 states.
Okay. Is that mostly bare root, or is it potted
It's
plants?
Potted and bare root. We ship year round, so a lot of it's potted.
Okay.
And it's bringing money in from out of state into Deep East Oakland, into a neighborhood that lacks almost any legal, dignified work opportunities.
Right. So let's get to the bigger vision here. If Planting Justice achieves, its highest aim, describe how the world looks, or at least, how the community here looks in the East Bay.
Yes. So we do have a vision for 10, 20, 50, and 100 years out.
Okay.
And what that looks like is creating a model that other organizations and other people in other cities can adopt, that enables people to do the work that they feel called to do. And grant writing, reporting on grants, that's a part of it. But what most people find when they're in the nonprofit world is that most of the work ends up being fundraising and chasing funds and reporting on funds. And, a lot of that work is behind a computer, and it's made easier by, your access to technology. And a lot of those jobs are filled by college educated folks. And what we're really trying to do is create opportunities for all people to be able to dive into this work. And so what that looks like for Planting Justice, our model, I started to explain it, but it's essentially a landscaping service that enables, that form of revenue generation, and enabling people to reconnect to the land and to the foods that sustains them on their own property, wherever they live. It involves grassroots organizing and canvassing. It involves an education program that works at schools, jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities. And it involves more commercial scale organic agriculture. And for us, what that looks like is perennial, no-till sort of food forestry, agroecology, using mostly perennial plants. Given our situation in the East Bay in California, almost all the bottomland has been developed. We're left with is slightly sloping hillsides that don't really look like farmland when you look at them before anybody starts doing any work. And so that first farm that we built in El Sobrante is meant to be a model for perennial no-till agriculture on marginal lands. Okay. And so what we're doing there is demonstrating how to capture the rain that falls on the property through a series of water harvesting swales on contour. And we've planted out the berms and the in-between spaces in perennial species. And so we're really trying to develop a model of food production that is as little input for as most output as possible, and really doing it in as much of an ecological, sustainable way as possible. And so that's for the sort of production of fruit, nuts, berries, and perennial tree crops. And then we have a vision for how to grow vegetables and herbs and annual vegetables on land that has no topsoil. And so for us, that's going to look like a recirculating aquaponics farm. And so right now we're trying to acquire a neighboring property in East Oakland that was a nursery for about 100 years, a Japanese nursery called the Nishi Brothers Nursery. And that's a 3+ acre property that we hope in the next year or two will become this incubator aquaponics farm. And so, if you have good topsoil, if you're out in this, in the Central Valley or some other place, you should use that topsoil.
Sure.
A lot of folks live in, highly industrialized cities that have no healthy topsoil any longer. And if we don't grow our own food, especially given the climate crisis and instability that we're facing right now, we're not going to have access to fresh, affordable, local produce in the years to come. Even we don't have it now in many cities and many neighborhoods. And so we're trying to demonstrate what that looks like, growing food on former gas stations, parking lots, land that's paved, that's, toxic, heavy metals, in a way of growing food that doesn't use the native soil. So that farm is meant to be an incubator farm. And what I mean by that is we're going to open source everything. We're going to figure out how to do it in an economically sustainable way, in an ecologically sustainable way, and teach people how to do it and help people learn what we're doing and get access to their own empty lots, even if they're much smaller, even a quarter of an acre, of which there are thousands of empty lots in the Bay Area around that size. And then we would start a producers cooperative. So people only have to learn how to grow the food. They don't have to do, at first, all the back end financial, accounting, zoning, planning and zoning, food safety, certifications, all of these barriers that prevent people from being able to do this work. They just can learn the aquaponics technology. And they'll be part of a cooperative that markets all the produce together and can source produce from perhaps dozens, perhaps scores of small aquaponics farms throughout the region, and market and distribute that produce through buyers that are already set up. So what then that looks like is that's sort of the complete model that we have in mind, those programs that I described. And most of those programs could be done as a package in every US city. So we're really trying to be prepared for what's to come. We are seeing the destabilization of industrial agriculture in the United States. The Central Valley, which in California, which produces currently 80% of the fruit and vegetables consumed in the nation, is an unstable situation with topsoil loss and climate change, drought, desertification. So we need to figure out how to feed ourselves on a regional, local, city by city scale. And so by cultivating undeveloped lands through perennial no-till food forestry and paved or otherwise toxic land through urban aquaponics, recirculating aquaponics, combined with the outreach through canvassing and the landscaping service and the education, that as a package, we want to help other people do. So that'll look like, packaging that really. So creating, the back end systems that will enable people to not have to recreate the wheel.
Totally. Well, Gavin, I got to tell you, the scope of your vision both gives me chills and it makes my brain explode. Like there's just a lot there. It's kind of daunting to me. I'm so glad that you're a pioneer willing to really just take this on and move it forward because it's so important.
One of the things about is like personal sustainability as well too, right? If I were to try to take all of those on myself, I would, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Right.
So part of what I've learned somewhat through actually permaculture, but just through kind of the trial and error of doing this work is to really get out of the way as much as possible. So we've done some really interesting internal, innovative, workplace democracy type of work within Planting Justice that makes it possible for us to take this large project on. I myself, I work just as much, mostly as 40-hour weeks. As a co-founder, co-director of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, I'm working 36, 40 hours a week, just like the rest of the team is, because we don't have the bottlenecking that happens in strict hierarchical organizations. So each one of the programs I described actually makes all the decisions that they need in order to operate, even down to the hiring and firing. We have a council system, a leadership council that's each program elects a member to sit on that leadership council. And that council serves as the executive body for the organization. We also have a conflict council, actually a peace council.
I like that spin. Yeah,
they rename themselves. And when there's interpersonal conflict between staff members, or if somebody is falling short on what they said they would do, the peace council is called to help with a network of restorative justice facilitators. I don't even sit on that council. So the days of, oh, when something goes wrong, let's call Gavin and he'll fix it type of thing, which actually creates a really unhealthy work environment, because then it's like, oh, well, Gavin said I could do this. And everyone's like, oh, that's not a good decision. And it sort of reinforces the power inequities that would happen in an organization. So we've set up that. And then we also did a transparent pay schedule as well, which is really innovative. So everyone knows how much everybody makes and why, and everybody had input into that transparent pay schedule. It's a very equitable model with yearly annual raises for everyone. And a base salary that there's add-ons to that are really transparent as well. So if you have prior experience, or if you're a single parent, or you have children under 5, or if you're formerly incarcerated, or all these different things that add on to that base salary. So there's no more, conflict between people, or some people feeling that they can't advocate for themselves to get a raise and other people can. Those types of things. So we've made these changes, and I'm describing them to you because that has enabled me as a co-founder and co-director to not be needed for the operations on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis. Unless something really goes wrong in one of the programs, then I'm called to help. But otherwise, I'm not really needed. So I can look at the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year vision, which involves a lot of organizing and a lot of relationship building and 10,000 small little steps before you actually see anything. So that's what I'm working on, because we do know where we want to go, where we need to go. And it's going to take a lot of work to get there. And if I get sort of in this, oh, well, everything needs to be run by me, or I need to have my eyeballs on everything, or that type of mentality, which I think a lot of founders might originally have, maybe I had even in the beginning of the organization, then it's just not going to work.
Wow. So I'm so curious about these internal systems. Where did you pull from in order to set these up? It sounds like you created some of them, but what resources did you tap into?
We're blessed to be part of a network that was started by the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And I encourage everybody to check them out. They have a ton of resources online, free, for organizations that want to do more internal workplace democracy. And so we're part of this network of national organizations, the Nonprofit Democracy Network, where we're innovating, we're sharing with other organizations around the country what's working, what isn't. We were on the path to do a lot of these things already. And then when we joined the first inaugural cohort of that Nonprofit Democracy Network, that's when we started really sort of solidifying and institutionalizing some of these things that we were already trying to do and trying to work on.
Right. Beautiful. Let's get into Gavin the entrepreneur.
Okay.
So did you consider yourself a natural entrepreneur? Did you have entrepreneurial tendencies growing up? Are you unemployable? Like what is, are you unmanageable, Gavin? Like tell me about,
I don't know,
Gavin as the entrepreneur. Like, do you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
Good question. It's not really a label that I think of myself as, but I definitely do a lot of that work. Right. I see myself more as an organizer, but given where we live and what economic system we're living in, an organizer that's trying to get access to land and create family sustaining jobs for people has to deal with money. So I think I have I would describe it as somewhat of an obsession with this vision.
Beautiful. And
I think about it before I go to sleep, when I wake up, and I do it every day. It's consumed me to some degree, but I also have been able to develop, I think with my children being born, especially, ways to be able to step out from it and just engage in the other aspects of life. But I'm really sort of possessed by this vision because I believe that it needs to happen. And so I'm really learning as I'm going. So, I was 25 years old when I co-founded Planting Justice. I never had any executive level experience, far from it. But I think I have somewhat of a knack for it. So yeah, it's been a lot of learning And I do have some fundraising experience, like I said, with the anti-war organizing that I was doing. So being able to talk to people, get people excited about something, and ask them to make a contribution or to make some other sort of action was definitely an important skill. So I actually see the canvassing training that we're doing with a lot of our staff as a really important skill, life skill for folks to be able to utilize in other places. But yeah, in terms of like the internal sort of controls and those types of things, I had to learn all of that sort of trial and error.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. What have been the biggest wins in your business, for the last 13 years that Planting Justice has been around, 12 years, 11 years?
Yeah.
What have been the biggest wins?
I think, firstly, the people. We're an organization that ideally has folks stay and become leaders in the organization. We have 32 staff members, full-time staff. Okay. Quite a few of us have been there for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, including folks who joined us directly out of prison and are now off parole, have a lot of stability in their lives and are able to give back in really deeply meaningful ways to other folks who are going through really difficult challenges. So, we've hired 40 people directly out of prison over the past 10 years. Wow. As far as we know, only one person has gone back on a new charge. So really, as sort of the prison abolitionist in me is proud to say that we've helped people stay home, stay in their communities, stay with their families, stay with their kids. I feel like the mass incarceration system we have in the United States is in a large part an extension of slavery. It came out of that system. I feel like it needs to change. We're not going to get rid of prisons tomorrow, but we can come up with models that help people do what they're called to do in their lives, which is help people and help their families. Almost everybody wants to be able to do that. And it's only because people are denied the basic necessities to be able to live that folks then act desperately out of a desperate situation and cause harm. And so that harm then has a tendency to continue creating harm. We say hurt people, and it's acting out of hurt and desperation where more hurt is done. And it only compounds the situation when you take that person out of their families and out of their communities and put them in a box where they can only go outside an hour a day. It punishes the entire community. It punishes those children. So I'm most proud about that. But I'm also really proud about the land projects that we're doing. Taking 15 acres out of the land commodification sort of system of buy and sell in the Bay Area is important, but it's how those land projects have been able to be of service to the communities that they're in, which is also really amazing. We're in Deep East Oakland on 105th Avenue, 319 105th Avenue. If anybody's in Oakland, Monday through Saturday, come by and see it. It's a really special project. We're in a part of Oakland where there's no public parks, there's no green space, there's no grocery stores, there's no place to work, there's no place to get healthy food, there's no farmer's market, there's none of these amenities. And it's open. We took the barbed wire down. It's the first thing we did. We opened the gates. The people who work there live there. They live literally next door, across the street, down the block. 10 out of the 13 people that work there could walk there. And I've lived in that community a long time. And they bring their kids there, and it's, opened up to the community, and it's a place of respite and connection. We're also working with Ohlone people, our native people, the people whose land it is that we are occupying. We live in the Bay Area on unceded Ohlone land. This is land that there was never a treaty. The people who lived here, tens of thousands of people, were rounded up 250 years ago and put into essentially a concentration camp where most of them died, but not all of them. And many people tried to survive the best way they could. They pretended to be Mexican. They had to sort of hide their indigenous heritage, and only recently have people, the past couple generations, sort of come out, being like, oh, I'm Ohlone. My great grandfather spoke Chichenyo. This is our ancestral land. And so Planting Justice is actually doing a really innovative collaboration with a Ohlone land trust run by women called Segurate Land Trust. And we're actually giving back the full 2 acres that we purchased. As soon as we pay off the land, it's going into the Segurate Land Trust. So it'll stay in Indigenous stewardship forever. And in exchange, the land trust will give Planting Justice a nominal, $1 a year long-term lease to keep running the farm and nursery. So I'm really proud of that too. The work that the Ohlone elders are doing there, building a spiritual center for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike, is really important. So they're building this beautiful arbor for ceremony. They're doing a lot of education work on the land. And it's really for all people who want to connect in a good way with the land and the people in their community, and how to get back into right relationship with life. So I'm really proud of that too. Yeah,
that's amazing. In terms of, you run a business, things don't always go right. What have been some of the toughest blows while you've been at Planting Justice?
Yeah, I think often the hardest things have been with people as well too. It's when people that we care about, that we've grown close to, have really suffered, have maybe, gone back into substance abuse. There's another young man that we've worked with since he was 9 years old who, has been incarcerated as a young adult. He's 16 and 17, and now he's 18, and he's still not free. I think a lot of the challenges and traumas that people go through, just trying to survive in this economy, have been really challenging. The housing crisis, we've had staff members living out of their cars, being homeless, trying to still hold it together, come to work. They've lost family members to suicide and drug overdose. We've lost a staff member who died way too young. It's been those sort of personal tragedies. And we often, back a couple years ago, didn't have the systems in place to be able to respond quickly enough. We were more of when something goes wrong, let's call Gavin or Helene type of organization, and have the capacity or the resources or the knowledge to be able to handle those situations well all the time. Those were the challenging situations. So I think developing better internal structures where people are more empowered to act quickly when they see something. Because we have folks on staff who have been through all that. They've been drug and alcohol abuse counselors. They've been in prison. They've been substance abusers. They have histories of addiction. They see things quickly. And if they're not empowered to act and they need to sort of run it by us or whatever, then, sometimes we're going to miss an opportunity to help somebody out before something bad happens. So,
yeah, great. Let's get into the last piece, money. Let's talk about money. Money gets a bad rap in the permaculture community. Why do you think that is?
A lot of it's deserved. I think especially our generation has seen the generation before us, our parents' generation, work themselves to the bone. Often many people have lost their homes. They've lost their equity. It happened in my family. I think the economic system that we're in, which really people find their value, define their value oftentimes based on how they're seen by the class that might employ them. You know what I mean? So if somebody's value is tied to whether or not they can produce profit margin for somebody else, and that's sort of how they identify, and that's where they get their value from. Right. Really difficult place to be in, especially as a young person who maybe tried to go to school and is coming out with debt from education, and then is sort of thrust into this world where the cost of living, the cost of housing, is so high, and people have to essentially produce, something of value, and make somebody else profit in order to be able to survive.
Right.
And if you don't, you go outside and you walk the streets and you see all the homeless encampments, you see what happens when people are seen to not be productive in the sense that they're not going to produce a profit for that system, then they're discarded and they're not afforded basic human rights of housing, food, water, sanitation, a place to use the bathroom. And so that's the kind of environment that we're growing up in, that we've grown up in, that we've seen. It's inherently unsustainable. It's not going to last. Capitalism is actually destroying the planet. At least it's destroying the planet for humans. So that's the situation that we're in. And given that, most of us need to pay rent. Right. We need to buy food. We need to send our kids to school. We want to send them to summer camp. We want to have them do extracurricular activities. All of those things cost money. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of in this in-between space, I believe. Like, I feel like, if humans are to survive, we're going to have to figure out a different economic system. But in the meantime, we're also needing to play, a part in it, in order to survive. So it's a tough situation to be in. And I definitely have, as you can tell from all of that, deep critiques about capitalism and money as it is. And I also know that right now it's necessary. So yeah, it's a tough situation to be in. And I think we really need to get really innovative. We need to take risks. We need to try new things. I'm emboldened by the new ideas that are becoming more mainstream that were not as mainstream even just a couple years ago, say with Bernie Sanders and his impact on the Democratic Party, and the way that young people are questioning capitalism. Like, that was sort of a myth, a mythology that was unquestionable in a lot of circles for a long time.
Yep.
Because part of what capitalism did really well was they told a story about creating a middle class. And capitalism did for a short period, after the Great Depression and all the organizing that went in the 30s and 40s, and people organizing for minimum wage and 5-day work weeks and unions and all of these things, there was a middle class for a short while, for a couple of decades in this country. We taxed wealthy people at very high rates. We had social programs, Medicare and Social Security and all these things that people fought for. But that only lasted a short time. And so capitalism's claim to, be, able to support a middle class has now sort of fallen flat on its face as the middle class has really suffered and crumbled across this country. And so we're now at this position where that's a real scary place to be in a lot of ways, because out of that could rise fascism and other. So we don't really know what's going to happen with the middle class now crumbling. We've seen it happen in Germany and other places, and it's happening in the United States as well too, where people look for someone to blame. And if they're not understanding how they really got into that position, and they want to blame immigrants, or they want to blame somebody else for the position that they're in, it can get ugly. And so I feel like we're kind of at that turning point right now as a society. And which direction are we going to go in? Is it going to be more like a humanist, sort of empathetic society where we recognize human rights and we strive to create a society where everyone has access to their basic necessities, or are we going to go the other way? So that's where I see us right now. And it's pretty much up to us. It's up to our generation. We have like 10 or 15 years maybe to figure this out. So here we go.
There you go. Let's get on it. One question that occurred to me as we were talking here, there's the nonprofit model, right? Raising money from others to do what you need to do. And then there's, let's compare that to investing, right? So in the stock market. How do you see the difference between, it's all just money, right? Getting money from some wealthy donors versus, figuring out how to invest in the stock market effectively. Do you see those as equivalent, or what are the differences there?
Well, I personally don't have any savings to invest in the stock market, so I don't really know. I'm not the best person to ask about investing, but I do know quite a bit about fundraising. And so I think for us, utilizing the various legal structures strategically has been useful. So for us, a nonprofit 501c3 structure is really useful in the sense that people get tax write-offs and we're able to qualify for foundation funding and government funding. And we've used it all. You know, we generate our own revenue, we fundraise, we have social enterprises, we, you know, create stuff, we make tens of thousands of trees, we sell those, we make medicines, tinctures, salves, we build gardens, we fundraise, and we also have county contracts. We have contracts with our city. We get public funding through the USDA and the California Department of Food and Ag. We have private foundations that fund us. So we try to use it all.
Again, my mind is exploding.
We have investors as well too. And we have investors in the nonprofit. So in Planting Justice, you know, and we needed to be able to acquire land and put in capital infrastructure. And so we see dollars as flows of energy, really. Like we can access flows of energy. And like any good permaculture designer, say with harvesting rain, you don't want that rain to go right out to the gutter and off the property. Imagine dollar bills as raindrops, you know? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to harvest those and keep them within the system as long as possible before they exit. And so every dollar that we get from a lender or from a foundation, if we can invest that in something that's going to generate a yield and generate a profit, or even just break even, but generate revenue, then we're doing a good job as designers. So that's what we've strove to do.
Okay. How important is it to really understand all the legal structures and how all those pieces fit together in order to, you know, make it the most efficient?
It turns out it's pretty important. And it's something that if everybody needed to take the time to learn how to do it on their own, then we would just be moving way too slowly as a society. So I think that that's a really important thing. You know, Planting Justice is 10 years in. I think we're maybe 2 or 3 years out from completing our model here in the Bay Area. And then it's what we do with that model that I think is going to be the next big step for us. So how to be able to empower other people to not have to go to, you know, through the school of life or some other kind of school to figure out how to run an organization, but that it's as much as possible set up for other people to enter.
Right. It makes me think, there was this image in my mind, like, you know, if you only had planted the tree 10 years ago, right? It's like you guys had planted the tree 10 years ago. And now you can give someone that tree that's already bearing fruit in the form of this model.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. All right. I got 3 quick final questions for you. You ready?
Cool. Ready.
So knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
That's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say. I think just like on a personal level, just making sure that, you know, that we don't fall into the same trap as, you know, in this economic system of really just valuing ourselves for what we can produce, you know, and really figuring out how to set aside enough time to make music, to play with friends, to enjoy the woods and the beach and, you know, and to enjoy our children and those types of things. So for me, having kids forced me to do that. I don't know if I didn't have kids, I'd maybe still be at this, you know, 60, 70 hour a week, just hustle type of thing. So yeah, I think just, finding balance, you know, knowing that there is urgency in needing to act, but that will only really be successful in our actions if we're grounded and healthy.
Recharged. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Fast forward to your funeral. If you could be a fly on the wall, what would you be happiest to hear people say about you?
I think just, that I was a good friend, that I was a good father, a good partner, that my life will live on in projects and in people that my work went into that are gonna live on without me. Really, that's what I'm hoping to do. Like, I don't I don't want planting justice to die with me or Hillel. I don't think it will, now that we've gotten to this point. So I'm trying to leave something that will help people be able to live the life that they feel called to live and be able to do good work. And so if I can help create an ecosystem or a climate for that, then I'll be happy.
All right, last one. For those people out there who just discovered permaculture, maybe they just finished their first permaculture design course, and they want to take action and make a difference, what advice would you give to them?
To reach out to other people who want to do the same thing, to find ways to connect with other people. Because especially given how land is controlled, how people often don't have access to maybe even any land except the strip out front of their house, or maybe a small backyard or whatever. There's a growing urgency, a growing understanding that we need to do things differently. And I think a lot of people share that desire, and we can do so much more working in collaboration with our neighbors. So finding other people who have that same desire, and just start, and do it in a way that is going to be fun, that other people are going to want to be involved with it.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.